Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to The Real Reason Europe Took Over the World by Johnny Harris. I've not reacted to him for a bit, so I guess it's good to be back. And this was a video posted literally 22 hours ago, so it's pretty recent. If you hear me sniffling, if you hear me coughing, I apologise. I am sick, like I've mentioned loads already today, but yeah, I just apologise if it's loud or anything, but I feel like when I turn, it doesn't pick up the sound as much, so that's good, but yeah, links are also in the description to my Patreon if you want to see some more videos of mine. But yeah, other than that, let's jump into this video and see why this is the case.
It's easy to think that Europe was so successful in taking over the world because they had like better ships or guns or whatever. But when you actually look at the whole story, you see that it was actually just a perfect storm of technology and timing and ideology and religion, of a few key inventions. And what I want to show you in this video is that one of the biggest reasons that Europe was able to take over the world is because of the invention of the modern corporation. A collection of people who don't know each other, but who pool their money together for the same goal: extracting resources from faraway places. So this is part 2 of how Europe stole the world.
Part 2? Wait, what? Is there a part 1? Oh, there's a part 1. And I guess I gotta watch part 1 first.
And today was sketched on paper by European men who looked like me. Men who at first were just curious and adventurous, but soon whose motives morphed into an insatiable greed, a confidence that their way was better than everyone else's. This confidence led to arguably the most influential series of events in human history, at least the history that affects you and me. A 500-year project of moving people and weapons and germs and language and violence to every corner of our earth. And in the process, gathering and taking home stuff to make them richer: metal, rubber, tea, sugar, and human bodies. This isn't a history lesson. You won't hear me talk a lot about dates and names. Instead, this is the first of 3 videos where I want to show you how this happened. How Europe, a continent full of poor, miserable farmers, took over the entire world. And in the process, they shaped it. They shaped it to their way of thinking and speaking and doing things. So this is part 1 of how Europe stole the world.
I'll probably react to part 2 in this video as well, if I can manage to do it, even though I'm pretty sick.
I am out here on a bit of an excursion near the sea, but I want to pause this video because I need to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, which is BetterHelp.
Money! He's getting his money. Again, this is a few months ago, so it's not going to stick now, but I can't imagine. How much money do you reckon he makes from his sponsors? He must get bread, man. Deserve to, bro. He deserves it.
Europe stole the world.
All these maps. God damn.
Yes, I'm going to be looking at a lot of maps to understand this issue because drawing on the map is how they did things. To understand how Europe stole the world, we need to rewind to back when the map looked a little different. Hold on.
He's got map
Back
drawers
in
and
like
everything.
1450, the world map looked like this.
Oh, wow. This is so cool to see. I've never looked at stuff like this before, about like world maps and stuff, but... Oh, mad. So England is still there. France, you got... It's called Castile at this point. Portugal. This is Germany. So you still got major cities like Frankfurt, you got Paris, you got London. Oh, this is actually so sick to look at.
I mean, Europe was just a bunch of smaller kingdoms. The borders look so different than they do today. They were all pretty small potatoes. Well, actually, there actually were no potatoes. Those wouldn't arrive to Europe for another 50 years. But the fact...
Wait, where did potatoes come from? I see potatoes as the most European sort of food. Like Ireland. We know about Ireland's love of potatoes. I love potatoes. And like in cold climates. But when did where did they initially start growing? What the hell? That's so weird.
There wasn't an abundance of anything in Europe. Instead, Europeans were just farmers barely scraping by, constantly in debt to a few rich landlords. Life in Europe was scarce and miserable. Meanwhile, there was a bunch of other empires around the world that were thriving. There was this big empire over in the Middle East. They had silk, and then over here in India, you had a big empire with spices and luxurious cotton fabrics. Then, of course, there was the big dynasty in China that had by this time already invented gunpowder, porcelain, and really sophisticated ships that they could use to sail around the world. Oh, and all of these empires were trading with one another, making all of them even richer. They all had better everything than Europe did, and miserable Europeans eventually wanted in on all the trade. So that's kind of the context here that sets the stage for Europe taking over the world. The first two countries that wanted in on all this trade and set out to explore were the countries that today we know as Spain and Portugal. So they start looking for a land route to get them east. They start moving east and nope. Oh look, it's the Ottoman Empire, a very powerful Middle Eastern empire that's run by Muslims. Meanwhile, Spain and Portugal are hella Catholic, and they're not being super nice to Muslims or Jews, so the Ottomans are like, no, we're not gonna let you pass through our land to get in on the trade in the East. Oh, and by the way, you can't even afford our taxes. You're miserable Europeans without a lot of money, so go away. They're gonna need another way to go east. Portugal's workaround was literally to go around the continent of Africa.
Jeez, how long would that have taken back in
to
these
trade
days?
with the wealthy African empires along the way. This is a huge moment because it actually worked. It's near the end of the 1400s, and the Portuguese are now going nuts. They're sending ships around this route that they figured out, trading with the East. And suddenly the Portuguese are dressing in luxurious fabrics. They're using cloves and cinnamon and black pepper to make their food actually taste good. Wait a minute, you're telling me they didn't have black pepper before this?
Oh my days.
Jeez, miserable indeed. You must have some papers. So the age of...
Bro, it's wild. This is obviously a long time ago, but it's not as long ago as I would have thought for like people to have been eating things like pepper or potatoes, just all these kinds of things. It's just like crazy how quickly things changed. You're at this point now, Europe is like the bottom, like they're like the poorest, or they just don't live the best lives compared to these other places in the world at this point. I don't know how long it took to change, but it literally flipped on its head. And I guess throughout the entirety of the human civilizations, obviously every country's had its own time when it's been on top, or every sort of, yeah, I guess every country. I don't know if they're considered countries at this point, but yeah, it's just crazy how it would have changed and all these trading things, and then it would have slowly led to more and more. Wait, we're quite far into this video. I thought we were like 2 minutes in.
Exploration has begun. Miserable Europe is doing something about their situation, going out to get in on the thriving trade in the East. But remember, this isn't about conquering land. It's about trading. For now.
Yep.
Okay, so now Spain sees Portugal hitting the jackpot, and they're kind of jelly. They want in on this too. They need to establish their own trade route to Asia, but they wanted to do things a little bit differently. Instead of following Portugal's lead and going around Africa, they listened to a pitch from this Italian sailor. And this sailor wants them to fund this new startup called, what if we sailed west to get to Asia instead of east? Super promising name. Now remember, at this point, people in Europe thought that the world looked like this. The logic was like, oh, we can just hop over to Asia by going this other way.
That is insane. So they actually had no idea at all. That's wild. They must have thought the world was endless or something. Mate, that is so crazy to even understand how it would have been for these people traveling around the world.
So Spain was like, yes, great idea, high risk, high return, do it, Columbus. Well, it turns out the world does not look like this. And instead, over here, there are a couple of massive continents that Columbus ran into. But like many of us confident white dudes, Columbus was like, yeah, I know exactly where I am. We're like in the Indies right now. Like over those guys over there, those are Indians. Yep, I can feel it. But instead,
So that's why he called. This is why it's known as the West Indies then, because he thought it was in India.
Instead, he was like in Cuba. But despite the mansplaining, Columbus kind of found exactly what he was looking for and more. Great empires with rich culture and food and precious metal that weren't available to him back home. He was right on target. So he's like, all right, guys, let's trade. But then he's like, wait a minute. These people don't have armies or navies protecting their stuff. So this must be kind of a different place, different land with different rules. And this is where the biggest light bulb moment of the century goes off in this guy's head. Change of plans, boys, says Columbus. We're going to claim this land. And everyone was like, wait, what? You heard me. We are claiming this land. And the boys are like, wait, weren't we here to like trade with great empires? Portugal's been doing this for like all these years and getting rich. And he's like, no, they don't have armies. They're just letting us show up and like be here without a fight. So obviously that means they don't mind if we just like claim the land. I mean, I'm taking some creative liberty here on like explaining what Columbus was thinking, but like, look at the letter that he wrote. Here's the letter that Columbus wrote back to the king and queen, reporting on what he saw. He writes back saying that he discovered many islands inhabited by numerous peoples, and then I took possession of them for our most fortunate king, making public proclamation and unfurling his standard, his flag, with no one making any resistance. No one making any resistance. Spain and Portugal set out to trade. They set out to like explore and understand and get in on the global economy. But Columbus's realization was instead of trading, they could actually just claim land for themselves. And this changed everything. After all,
rich, man.
No one was making any resistance. This moment is the foundation upon which all European imperialism grows. I'll show you. It's the moment that would give us the first big division in the minds of Europeans, the thing we wrote on paper, the old world versus the new world. This is really familiar language to us now, but it was invented in this moment. The new world was now seen as land that could be claimed. It was fair game to go conquer because they didn't have big armies or a Christian king. Forget trade with the East, said Columbus. There's a bunch of land that we can go take over in the West. And the race was on.
Do you know what I would have found pretty cool? Imagine like we just didn't like North and South America just were kept untouched, and then Europe, Asia, Africa. Is that all the continents? I think, and Oceania, I guess, were just all on there like doing their same trading stuff. I wonder how different the two like sort of societies would actually be. Like obviously the world is like so many different societies now, but like how their way of the world would be, because they had no kings, they had no, or they probably did, but like it wasn't to the same extremities. They probably weren't. It just was different hierarchies and just different ways of life. I wonder how they would be now. Say we now first discovered to like travel, but then our half, I say our half, Europe, etc., this side, not the Americas, pretty much, were like living in like a world where I guess the technology was a bit further ahead, or just certain things like this. I wonder what the Americas would be like, how they would have gone without knowing anything about us and us knowing nothing about them. Like how advanced they'd be, how like they would do certain things. Like I don't know, I'm really bad at explaining things, but I just wonder how it would be in that part of the world if it was left untouched, and then maybe in 5 years' time, now like 2025, it was discovered. Either they discovered us or we discovered them. I wonder how like how much of a contrast it would actually be. Because back then it was a big contrast, but nowadays I can't even imagine. I assume Europe, Asia, I say Asia, Europe discovering that part of the world is now how Europe is so advanced, or was so advanced at a certain point, because that helped them. At that point, Europe was probably struggling a lot more than anywhere else on the planet. But yeah, maybe Europe would be like in the mud, and the Americas would be thriving as they are, and then Asia, Africa would be thriving as they are, but like even more so. And yeah, Europe would be like at the bottom of the barrel, you know. I mean, that's almost certain, isn't it?
Spain and Portugal didn't want to fight with each other over all this land, this conquest that they were about to undertake. So they got together and they drew some lines. No, literally, they just drew 2 straight lines. We have Africa, we have Europe, and then we have this line. Everything left of this line is Spain's. Everything to the right is Portugal. This is literally one of the original maps where they actually drew these straight lines and divided the world into 2. But let's look at this on a nicer looking map, please. There we go. Now we can see very clearly.
Spain got lucky.
Now we understand why they speak Portuguese in Brazil. So Spain and Portugal now have their spheres of the world that they can go conquer. They didn't ask anyone. They didn't negotiate with the locals.
Oh, even this side as well. Damn.
They just drew these straight lines. The Pope actually helped them broker the deal. Classic. But again, this is a huge thing that I want to explain in this series, that these were not just lines. They weren't just like lines on paper. They were actually a shift in the paradigm, a new way of thinking about the world. No one making any resistance. It was a story that Europeans could now tell themselves. Old world versus new world. Claimed versus unclaimed. A new way of thinking. Think I'm being overly simplistic about this? Let me show you something. 1, 2, 3, 4.
He loves his maps.
These were a juicy find. I found this amazing Portuguese nautical atlas. It's a bunch of maps that the Portuguese Navy drafted up right after these 2 lines divided the world between Spain and Portugal. And it is an amazing series of maps, but not only because it's visually stunning, but also because it lets us into the mind of how the Portuguese saw the world after they divided it with Spain. This atlas reads like a storybook. It's like the Portuguese were so giddy about giving themselves permission to steal half the world that they had to write a children's story about it. That's what it feels like. That's not what it is. But just look at this. Here's the title page. You can see that at the center is the sphere that was given to Portuguese. Brazil, Africa, what is now the East Indies. And here on every corner, you see these angels that are blowing wind into the sails of the Portuguese who are out on their land grab mission. So this is just the title page. The subsequent pages of this atlas are close-ups on different regions. This is the Caribbean over here, look. This will become Cuba, this will become Haiti, Dominican Republic, North America, South America, all of this unclaimed, up for grabs. Here, our story depicts all these flags. Some of them are Spanish flags on the islands on their side of the line, but then you have Portuguese flags on the Portuguese side of the line. The status of this land, according to the fantasy of the Portuguese, changing from unclaimed to claimed by men on ships with Christian crosses on their sails, showing up and planting flags. This was like playing a board game to them. Here's another page. This one's a close-up on Brazil. And look, we've got people over here. We've got dark-skinned, naked people with primitive tools and no homes. It looks like down here in Brazil, they spend their days chopping wood naked and dancing, all while being gazed upon by fantastical birds and dragons? This was an official naval atlas drafted for the king. And if its message wasn't clear enough on how these people should be depicted, the atlas has a little info box up here where they say that the Brazilians are, quote, savage and very brutal. This is one of the first atlases ever made, and it wasn't really a navigation tool. It was much more a declaration of a new way of seeing the world. Unclaimed territory, subhuman people, all of it up for grabs by Christian boats. So yeah, this is how it all started. Under this new paradigm, both empires expanded very quickly, forcing the Spanish and Portuguese languages across the ocean, mining vast quantities of silver, creating plantations for tobacco and sugar, and in the process massacring the people who were living in this new world, both with their weapons, but also with their European city germs that the people being conquered didn't have immunity to. I mean,
yeah, because they've obviously been living in their own sort of things. They've been having their own probably flus, but Europe went through some times where they had some bad flus or plagues or whatever, and they've now brought over all that sort of stuff, and they're now immune to it. They've built up their natural immunity or whatever. But these people weren't. Oh damn! I didn't even clock up. I didn't even clock that. Is there any history behind like or there is history, but like, is there like any like written history and history that we can learn from about the Americas and like the history of stuff like plagues and stuff? Did they go through certain things like that, or was it just a lot cleaner? Maybe people didn't live through certain things that led to diseases like that, etc. But or just general history. I would actually love to learn about the history of the Americas before they were invaded and discovered, which obviously they were discovered, but they weren't like made then. They were still obviously for years, thousands of years before that. I would love to learn about that actually. If anyone's got like a video about it, please let me know.
And this whole thing started with curiosity, with a thirst to get in on the trade in Asia. But soon, as this fantasy of unclaimed land came into the picture, the goal shifted, the project pivoted, and soon Europe was telling themselves a new story, that they, enlightened Christians, were entitled to claim it. And while this story starts with Spain and Portugal, soon it spread. Other European countries poked their head up from their farm
England, Britain,
and said, hey, we're white Christians also. We know how to sail. We want in on this story of unclaimed land. And that's the next chapter of the story, one that I will tell you in the next part of the series.
And that's where we got to. So now we are here, the real reason Europe took over the world. Wait, did I like this video? I didn't know. Let's leave a like quickly. Let's click this one.
It's easy to think that Europology and timing and ideology is just a perfect storm of technology and timing and ideology and religion, of a few key inventions. And what I want to show you in this video is that one of the biggest reasons that Europe was able to take over the world is because of the invention of the modern corporation. A collection of people who don't know each other, but
seen this.
So this is part 2 of how Europe stole the world. Hey, before we dive into this story fully, I need to tell you about the sponsor of today's video who made this video possible.
Is it Curiosity Stream again? Policy Genius. Don't know what it is, but he's getting his bread. And you love to see that. Getting his cashola.
Insurance buying, go to policygenius.com/JohnnyHarris. Link is also in the description. Thank you, Policy Genius, for supporting this video. Let's dive back into how Europe stole the world. Okay, quick catch up on where we are in the story. In part 1, we talked about how Spain and Portugal went out to get in on trade and accidentally ran into a bunch of land they decided was unclaimed, and it turned into a big race to see who could take over as much land as possible. After about a century of this, other Europeans start to take notice of this model of expansion. And they realize that it's a great way to enrich your country. Some of these countries have been dabbling in imperialism, but in the early 1600s, it was time to get serious. The first to follow suit were the Dutch, who were becoming really good at navigating water and making maps and doing business. They decided to follow Portugal's lead and go around the bottom of Africa, stopping right here at the very tip in what today is known as Cape Town, South Africa. They established a permanent colony of white settlers whose descendants would go on to become a major part of South Africa's history.
Wait, wow. I didn't clock that this was from the 1600s. I thought that the whole Netherlands Dutch people living in South Africa was like in the 1900s, not even the 1900s. The 20th century is what I'm trying to say, because that's the 1900s. Yeah, I thought it was the 20th century it happened. I mean, I know all the horrible things happened then, and obviously before, I guess, as well, but I didn't realize they came and settled like centuries? Hundreds of years before. Wait, centuries is 10 years, right? Oh, God. Millennium's 1,000, decade is 10, centuries 100. Okay, so centuries before that. And for such a
The
small
Dutch
country
used
as
their
well.
prime position in Cape Town to restock on their way to Southeast Asia, where they were trading for spices with local empires and claiming serious amounts of land in what is today Indonesia. Around the same time, at the start of the 1600s, we see the next kingdoms trying their hand at large-scale imperialism. Meet the two rookies on the block, England and France, who
not
would
looking
go
good,
on
bruv.
to actually cause a lot of trouble on the world map, but for now they're just getting
And I guess England and France were then pissing off Spain and Portugal because they were already like, oh, we've claimed this is ours. And I guess they were like, nah, man, we're taking this now.
started. They, for the most part, followed Spain's lead, going west for the Americas, though England sent ships east at this time as well. Anyway, here in the Americas, they showed up and, like colonizers before them, found lots of land and lots of people living on that land. Kind of inconvenient. These aren't real people, right? They don't actually own this land. You can hear the English people like sort of saying to themselves. So they came up with a new, very useful tool. It was a mental tool. In addition to guns and smallpox land, you can
Is this
hear
to
the
do
English
with opium? I don't know when the opium stuff happened, but they were like giving people opium.
tribes
no?
that helped them divide and conquer the locals. Europeans also developed a complex set of legal philosophies to convince themselves that these people were not in fact capable to claim any land. After all, they were foragers. They didn't farm. They couldn't own this land because they didn't use it for productive means. They were subhuman, or at least non-civilized, so they do not deserve to own property. Very clever, very effective.
That is horrible. Imagine how it would have been.
So
for
now
them,
you
man.
see the next layer of ideological thinking that was required for these Europeans to justify their land theft. It was the need to dehumanize the people living on these lands. Here's a letter from a British settler who describes North America as a wilderness, quote, where none inhabit but hellish fiends and brutish men. This dehumanizing paired really well with another ideology that was very popular at the time, Christianity. A religion that told its followers to go out and preach to everyone so that they can be saved. Perfect. We have these unrefined, brutish, fiendish men, and we have Christians who have the power to save them. Anything is possible now. So by the late 1600s, the colonizing project is fully underway. A lot of Europeans are getting in on this, but here are the major players. You've got Spain and Portugal, the OGs, and then you've got the Netherlands, France, and England. We need to make one thing clear, that the major reason why these European empires were so successful so quickly was because they were really the first to start trading by sea in the Western Hemisphere. So, while Jesus and saving and whatever was a big part of the justification of Europeans going out and feeling entitled to take land, he became less and less of a part of the picture. Especially for the Dutch, who basically were just like, who cares about Jesus? We want profit.
Fair enough, straight to the point.
And this is the next phase of the story of how Europe took over the world. We'll call this chapter Private Empire. And frankly, it's one of the most important things to know about this history. Remember that European imperialism started as a desire for trade, to trade with big empires in the East. Then, surprise, we found all this land, we'll call it unclaimed, and we'll start claiming it while dehumanizing the natives in the process, remember, okay? A lot of that was funded by governments, like kings and stuff. But eventually, the citizens themselves of these places realized that they could make a business out of this. And again, this is where the Dutch wrote the blueprint. So now, instead of asking the ruler for support, they could just get together a bunch of people and form a corporation, like the first corporation ever, the Dutch East India Company, which would fund private voyages. And you, a random Dutch person in the 1600s, could buy this share, a little portion of that company, to get in on a little bit of the profits. But if the profits are big enough, then everyone wins. Welcome to the era of corporations. So now you have the Dutch with their new Kickstarter campaign, crowdfunding their private empire, totally exceeding their goal. And these Dutch corporate sailors set out on the tried and true routes that they already knew, arriving to Indonesia, where they showed up not to convert people to Jesus necessarily, but to harvest cloves and peppers as efficiently as possible, and to come home and to sell them for a profit and fatten the pockets of the shareholders who funded the whole journey. This isn't like a surprising novel model to us today, because this is how the world runs, But at
But
this
back
point,
then-
this was a new invention. Oh, and the government secretly loved this. They could give the company some military power, kind of ignore the details of exactly how it was all going down, and still ensure that their country got in on the world's riches. And these corporations leveled up really quickly and became basically little private empires with the ability to take over land, build bases, and establish relationships with locals, not for the prestige of like a king, but so that they could make more money for their shareholders. It was the private investors who helped them get really big, really fast, all through this invention of the publicly traded company. And again, it all started with the Dutch East India Company. And just like any startup, they were more nimble than the clunky old government. They had good funding, they were private, they were fast, they had an ability to undercut competition. All of this allowed them to dominate this region when it came to taking over land, harvesting stuff, and bringing it back to Europe. And because they were the best operators, they eventually became the kingpins of all spice trade in Europe. Things like black pepper, nutmeg, cloves. All of this because of the countless trips that they were taking between the East Indies and Amsterdam. Okay, but it wasn't just the Dutch. The British also got in on this private empire idea. Let's see here. This map. It's the map of all of the British private companies and their spheres of influence. The government doesn't own these places. This is like government supported, but by and large, private companies. Profit-seeking businessmen looking for stuff that they couldn't get in their own country, going out and finding places where they could. Over here in North America, you have the Virginia Company, who's like going hardcore on tobacco, and then its sister company, the Plymouth Company. One was funded by a bunch of Londoners, and the other, the Plymouth Company, funded by a bunch of rich dudes in Plymouth, England. Their job
What?
was to colonize land.
Plymouth, England had a control of something in the US. What? That's so. I mean, it makes sense. It's the name, and obviously, when I heard the name, I was like, wait, Plymouth. But Plymouth and London, like they're two. Like Plymouth is just like an average-sized city. What the fuck?
By a bunch of rich dudes in Plymouth, England. Their job was to colonize land and to build a business in the New World. And then, if you look over here in the East, you see the British East India Company, who got really good at taking over giant amounts of land in India. The French were doing the same thing. They had their own West India Company that was colonizing the Caribbean to grow and sell sugar, and many, many more. Private empire was such a powerful accelerant to imperialism because it got all of these private empires to compete with each other and to get better and more efficient and to practice their conquest, repetition, fueled by profit-seeking people. They developed amazing skills and they drew maps. A lot of beautiful, beautiful maps. As a map nerd, this is where I start to like perk up. I notice around this time, like sort of late 1600s and then the 1700s, European maps start to fill out with more detail, with more accuracy. Because after all, the more you can depict on paper, the better blueprint you have to conquer land and exploit it. So by the 1700s, Europe is now a different world than what you saw in the 1400s. You start to see kings living in insane excess. Tea and coffee and chocolate and tobacco and sugar. They have access to so much stuff. And perhaps most significantly, it wasn't just for the ultra rich, it was a new middle class, the mercantile class of merchants who were getting rich off of all of this new commerce. There was suddenly abundance. And with abundance comes time. Time to sit around and think about art and science, all while sipping on coffee harvested from faraway lands, stimulating these European brains to invent new ways of measuring things, to observe the world, the stars, to manipulate nature to make life better. And the competition between these private empires just grew. And like with any profit-seeking competition, these companies needed to keep leveling up how much wealth they could extract from these places, how much land they could take over to meet demand back home. Until eventually they turned full on to the most horrific version of profit-seeking imperialism. Stealing millions of people from, most notably, here in West Africa.
It's actually mental to me how this all started from the whole like Portugal and Spain looking for a way to get Portugal wanted a way to get to India, right? Or just Asia as a whole to get like certain things, products to buy and sell, etc. and then it slowly led to one thing to another, and then it went to this, and it's just like, mate, this is just insanity, isn't it?
taking them to their new colonies and
It's just greed. It's just an example of what greed does to people.
forcing them to work.
It's actually horrible.
Stealing
man.
and trading humans and forcing them to work was not anything new to this continent. Islamic and African slave traders have been doing this for a very long time. But it was here in the 1700s.
Didn't they use white people? I might be talking up my ass, but I swear, like, there was a point in time when Africa was on top. I say, like, the northern countries of Africa, like Morocco, Algeria, I guess Egypt, and I guess Asian countries as well, maybe Middle East, and I don't know. They used white people as slaves. I don't actually know. I might be wrong with that, but way before that, I guess any time a country or an empire has been on top, they will use people to try and make themselves even richer, and not caring for them, so using them as slaves. But I might be wrong with that. I don't actually want to say that's the truth or not, because I might be completely off. But yeah, I guess he's talking about different countries at different points in time using slaves, etc.
Have been doing this for a very long time. But it was here in the 1700s, in this context of private empire, that things really start to pick up. As these European empires, mostly England, Portugal, and France, took it to a new level to fuel their highly optimized, shareholder-fueled private empires. So optimized that the slave trade itself was outsourced to a private company, at least in the case of England. It was imperial, profit-seeking efficiency at its finest, and most horrifying. You can almost hear the glee and greed in the voice of one English slave trader who wrote, quote, "What a glorious and advantageous trade this is. It is the hinge on which all the trade of this globe moves."
Hopefully hell is hot enough for you,
But
man.
Europeans are starting to become really enlightened at this point, right? Like, they're starting to think through, like, human rights and, like, equality, and starting to lay the groundwork for, like, democracy. Yes, but remember that these Europeans had ideas in their minds that were planted hundreds of years earlier. Ideas that allowed them to invent things like the New World and unclaimed land that actually belonged to them. They applied a lot of those same ideas to the slave trade. A lack of Jesus, a lack of white European culture and technology, making these people inferior, in need of saviors to make use of their land, their resources, and their bodies. Okay, but let's just be clear about what's happening here. Yes, this is about profit. Yes, this is about ideology. But this part is so damn important to me because this is the foundation upon which our modern world is built. In this moment, these empires were actually building structures in our minds. Structures that define who has power, who is worth something, who gets resources, who is permitted to lead, to exploit, to benefit. These structures were defined by force, by profit, by greed, and they totally worked. They put Europeans on top, giving them the prosperity and resources to fuel scientific, cultural, and political revolutions that allowed them to keep holding on to that power, to keep exerting domination over others. Okay, yeah, I get it. Half of you just had like a conniption because of this like woke sermon that you just got from me. That's not what this is, okay? I'm trying to look at the history and tie it to today. How all of us live in a world that was built off of what happened during this time, the ideas, the movement of people that happened because of this private empire. That's not the woke mob, that's just like, what happened? Sorry. Even after the British people here on the east coast of North America wanted to break away from England and start their own country where, quote, all men are created equal, they still couldn't throw off the thirst for profits that slavery brought them. These structures were way too firm, so they kept doing it. The momentum of private empire was too great to slow down, at least not without a bloody war that almost ripped this young nation apart. So, That's private empire, a huge part of Europe's ability to take over land on the map and reshape the world. In part 3 of this series, which is going to be
Part
the
three?
final part, I'm going to tell you what happens next when these powers reach every part of the globe, establishing an order that they control. How we talk, how we do our politics, how we trade, including some really good positive things that have made the world better. It's an order that was shaped by these forces of European imperialism, and it's an order that still shapes all of us today.
Well, damn. Part 3, I'm going to react to that obviously when it comes out. This has just came out, so it'll probably be like another month or so, but I'm interested to see that for sure. As an Indonesian, I can say Johnny's story about the VOC East Indian Company is more compelling than what I obtained back in school. Another fact our history is too embarrassed to acknowledge. Wait, so their own country doesn't teach them about it? That the VOC is a company. We are told that the Dutch colonized us for 350 years. In fact, the colonization was begun in 1912. Damn. It's interesting that this is so wild. I'm actually like fully learning. Obviously, we know the history of Europe and the world and how they've colonized everything, and Europe was just like, yeah, I'll have that, I'll have this, I'll have that. But I'm really learning sort of in depth about it is interesting. And like, obviously, we learn things in school, but you don't learn that in depth situations. And also, it's reminding me of things that I did learn, but I forgot about, and just all this kind of stuff. But hopefully you enjoyed this reaction. If you want more of this, let me know in the comments. And when part 3 comes out, I will react to that as well. But yeah, suggest some more stuff you want to see. And until next time, like, subscribe. Peace.